I needed some maps of San Francisco framed, and I'd been referred to this place called Schein. So I walk in on a rainy Saturday, and this place is cozy, and it's organized, and it's inviting, and there's curtains and books and maps, and it feels a little bit like a ship, a little bit like a library, a little bit like Ollivander's, the wand shop from Harry Potter on Alley. You can just feel the wisdom oozing out of the walls and the trays of maps. So that's when I met Jim and Marty Schein. I showed Jim my maps, and he knows them. He knows all of them. One of them he calls the map of the 7 rabbits. He tells me this other map about Miss Johnson's house. It's on this map and the other map and that map. And anyway, I'm like, who is this guy? And I haven't fully figured it out yet. But what I have discovered so far is that he's as crazy about maps as I am. And why am I crazy about maps, and why did I put this exhibit together? So maps are what Webster Pacific does for a living, but we don't make old maps, we make new maps, helping companies with all things geospatial. But more than that, these maps are about design and discovery. These maps are beautiful. The intelligence, the artistry in these maps is amazing. And they're about discovery. I wanted to learn about San Francisco. And they're also about community discovery, about being together and learning together. And this right here is really what I was hoping would happen. I do want you to know that this exhibit is available to be shared. So if anybody wants to borrow this map, it was made as a pop-up, so let me know. We want to spread our passion for maps and discovery. There's also a link to all the images, so all those things you saw hanging underneath, all those, that's available on our website. So if you want that for any reason, if you want to get crazy like we do. So before I pass to Jim, a few thank yous. So to Steve Hannon, who is a client and president of the New York Map Society. He's not here, but he is one of the people who sparked my interest. To Michael Jennings, who I don't think is here, but he introduced me to you. Sarah McDonald did the Balin's map, which is over there. Nicole Gluckstern and a gentleman named, believe it or not, Burrito Justice did the bikes to books map. Tavia Stewart Strite and L.J. Moore did the sunken ship map, which is right there. Joel Pomerantz did the Seep City map. And Joaquin Diaz, is he here? Right back there, my FedEx map buddy. You are awesome. And then to the Webster Pacific team, to Steve, Ames, and Chris, who've listened to me tell them about a new map discovery virtually every morning.
We start our meeting.
So we started every meeting. To my children, who thanks their children. Sarah, thank you so much for coming. And then, of course, to Eleanor, who has supported me in my craziness for 18 years. Thank you. All right, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Jim. He's going to talk for a little bit, and then we really want to just answer your questions and have a conversation.
Wow. Tom, when he's talking, you can't imagine how exciting it is to have someone like Tom come into my store. Marty has indulged me as Eleanor has indulged him, and we have a business that's on Grant Avenue in North Beach, and we've been there for about 17 years. It was a second or third career after departure from the entertainment business, and maps have always been central to my life and spatial memory. I come definitely from a spatial memory family, geologists and geographers and landscape architects and people in our family, so that makes sense. But what I find really exciting is a certain commonality. When we opened the map store almost 20 years ago, we thought, oh, we'll get a bunch of guys like me, maybe. Maps, everybody loves maps, and what maps are so personal. And so how we map, and everybody is mapping, and of course maps have become more relevant. A phone, which is the latest love affair of our culture, is all about mapping. It's about navigating the phone. It's about what you're asking it, about what you're doing as a result of what it's telling you. These are all hippocampus. These are all spatial memory things. These are all you're engaging, if you're doing it right. If you're just following your GPS blindly and getting into a dead end and stuck, yeah, you're probably not doing that right. And that's a reality, because we see that behavior in urban behaviors as far as what information we're willing to take and where we take it and whether we critique it or not. So often enough map makers kind of play to that. And they expect a certain amount of interaction with the map viewer. And the map viewer, us, has changed greatly. But we're still map viewers as a culture and as people. And it goes to the primal self. So almost any time someone comes into the store, it really comes to, who you're from and where you're from and who your family's from and, the family history stuff. But it also comes to how we see the world. And whether you come to the intersection of California and Kearney and you say, oh, well, I'm at the Banker's Heart. Or you say you're at 601 California. Or you say at the intersection of. Or you say you're at St. Pat's. Or you say, these are all references for the same corner. And how we see that is personal and very individualized, but it's all very much mapping. Now with introduction of Tom's World, it's exciting because I've been trying to figure out why we're still in business. and it's barely, but the fact is it's a labor of love. It's a labor of love, but also we have to kind of look at the point of what is it about. It's about mapping, it's about the engagement. Part of it is nostalgia for the world that we grew up in and how we attained information. And part of it is the relevancy of where we're trying to find context. Where did we take a left turn that changed this direction that has impacted my life so greatly? I'd like to kind of see that and go back to that point to see where that left turn was. In the digital world, they're doing this now, and with the advent of phones as supercomputers, we really have an incredible amount of data. Esri mapping, the overlaying of mapping. The maps that are made here are gorgeous. Have you ever seen them? Aesthetically, they are amazing. As maps, they are works of art, but academically, when you look at them, if you're a map nut, like Tom or me, they are talking to you constantly. The iconography, once you understand the legend, the iconography is really explicit. And that's always the goal of a map, is this simplicity of communication. And so that simplicity of communication, once we start defining that as a map, then we see maps in all kinds of things that we wouldn't otherwise interpret as being maps. And then our experience in mapping broadens. So that's been my experience at the store. There's a guy who drove a truck and did logistics, basically. I can load an aircraft and do that mentally. I'd never used a slide ruler computer. We could do that mentally. But that's why I map now, is because it resolves that part of my brain that likes to do that stuff. Sometimes people who are mappers or who create maps might have a quirk or an idiosyncrasy like that. I find it fairly common. One of the aspects, I grew up in a college town, nuclear physicist on one side and Joel Myers of AccuWeather on the other side. Boy, these guys would just talk stuff that I'd be like, what are you talking about? But they both had OCD. They both were collectors. They both had mapping gene that caused them to do things and perceive things in a certain way. And that's definitely had an impact on me. So those are the bigger aspects of mapping that I find interesting at the store. My personal passion, to get to the point, is San Francisco. I worked as a roadie, and every third day was a day off. So I'd go find a bookstore and go buy a map. That's basically how I spent my 20s and my 30s. And by 40, we opened the store, and I've been doing that. San Francisco is an amazing place. Aside from its transience, it's a town that was built by miners and built by people who love to change the landscape. So what we have as a landscape, the city of hills, was actually much hillier. It was actually much more rough and rugged and was covered with sand. We really forget that if you're west of Nob Hill, not the western edition, Nob Hill, you're living in sand dunes. And the rock outcroppings and that lifestyle, everything that went with it, from purple butterflies to sand fleas, it's kind of gone now. That part of San Francisco is gone. But when we look at maps that are presented here, we really can see that San Francisco. And that's why people often today are going back to these older San Francisco maps to look at earlier grids or look at the way things were. This was the edge of town right behind us. As soon as you went up the hill 2 more blocks, you were kind of done in 1850. And there was a fence there, which is Victorian for the edge of town. But it also was physically there because there were cows, and you kept the cows out of town. You actually had agriculture in Hayes Valley. The mission had lands around it. All the lands were lands owned by rancho people. There are a great series of maps here. Some of my absolute favorite maps that I've ever seen are here in this collection. Tom's done an amazing job in what he's assembled. They're pieces from my collection, from David Rumsey's collection, digital files of maps that I might get once in a lifetime or once every 10 years. And to be able to have a replication, to be able to get up on and have the quality of imagery that we can really have a conversation about what's going on there and what they're saying at that time is really a privilege and phenomenal. Among my favorites here would be the 1857 example of San Francisco that we don't have. I've never had it before, and he has an example of it, and it's just an amazing map. The Chinatown maps, the two, are incredible, and they're maps that are used to reinforce exclusionary legislation, to enforce laws that excluded people of a certain ancestry from having the basic civil rights that would be guaranteed to everybody else. Maps can be used as weapons, ultimately, and maps were always proprietary, right? They still have a certain proprietary nature. But remembering until, we'll say 1700, if you made a map and it disagreed with the Pope or Calvin, you could be killed, and people were. I have maps in the store by people who were burned at the stake. We definitely have a change in the influence of maps. And in San Francisco, when we look at maps, we have to remember our short history. It's such a small window in the mapping. So he starts with the Waldsmuller 1507, which names the continent, and it's 300 years or so till we actually have a definition of the west coast of California. California and New Zealand being the last places to really have shorelines documented by map makers. So we're really at the end of the earth in colonial terms. And with that, the mapping and the information came a bit slowly. But when it does, it comes at a feverish pace. The gold brought the people, the silver brought the money. And we see that in the maps, we see that in the growth of the city. When we see San Francisco go from 1,000 to 20,000, we see that growth in the 1853 or the 1854 maps. But when we see the city go from 20,000 to 250,000 in 1868 and 70 after the Civil War and the silver strikes, that really is evident. And the interest of our federal government to map us and their goals with what we have in wealth, being the largest extraction of mineral wealth ever to be pulled from the planet, was here in 1862 through 1870, right? And probably, I don't know, a high percentage, 80, 90% of that money came through here. It wasn't printed, it was gold bullion or silver bullions that were processed in San Francisco. So that meant all the building and all the construction and all the wealth came through here, and with it all the ancillary industries that came with having that wealth. The final point being that when the city burned in '06, today being the anniversary of that, by the way, the 113th anniversary. Cool. When the city burned in '06, I lost my point of thought, sorry. Sorry, it's okay.
The one, how much, what anniversary?
Oh, money. The Mint didn't burn. So the Granite Lady, which is a marvelous building, we're still trying to save it. But $600 million in gold bullion was in that building, physically. And the 5 men who were charged with maintaining that building knew that there was a spring in the basement, and that building was granite and had iron shutters, and they spent the night putting buckets of water on the iron shutters to keep the building from engulfing in flames. And in doing so, saved that $600 million in gold, and in doing so, that's really why we rebuilt. Because credit was out there and people, but physically having the money here to rebuild is a big difference between somebody 3,000 miles away saying, we'll get to that. Big, big difference, and it really, really precipitated a change in our ability to reconstruct. Having 600 million in bullion is a big deal. Ooh, burn district, nice. So, today's the anniversary. Essentially, the original city is gone. Everything from here to Larkin Street is the original Eddy plan of the city. And that's basically what burned. From Larkin to Van Ness, we dynamited 2 blocks wide from City Hall all the way up to St. Bridget's, Broadway. And I've seen the photos. This area and everything, you've got an image here somewhere, it's basically all masonry and ironwork, right? Everything wood and everything combustible is gone, but what's still there is masonry and ironwork. Except for those blocks between Larkin to Polk to Van Ness, where there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. It's obliterated. It has been blown up and it's been pulverized, so nothing can burn, and there is no residue whatsoever. Those blocks, if we look at the map of 2 years after, 1908 map of the city, showing the permits and the reconstruction, places like the Tenderloin are very slow to rebuild because they're very large buildings that took a while to tear down, and they took more time to rebuild and get the permitting. My neighborhood, my house was rebuilt 6 months after the earthquake, and the Italian who built it then went on and built the rest of the city, right? But in 1908, the area that was Larkin to Polk and all the way up, that was built fast. because it didn't have to remove any debris. It could have been thrown all over the city, all to the left and the right. But we really see that. This is a marvelous, dramatic map of the burn district. And remembering it's the largest conflagration in an urban area in known history, and 7 times larger than the Chicago fire of 1872, and 9 times larger than the Baltimore fire. So known urban fires, which of course are always a threat because we don't really have fire suppression systems. It's the 19th century. So this is a fantastic rendering of selling after the earthquake, rebuilding the city. We're still here. The propaganda was, we're still here. Remember, we're only a 50-year-old city and we're on a sand dune that's only half built. So we could have evaporated pretty easily. You could have said, you know, that's not been a good venture. Let's go to the other side of the bay. This truly, you have to just kind of imagine Pismo Beach or Dunes National Park. There are no trees, and everything we have in a tree, we've planted that. So anyways, I don't want to take too much of your time. I think Q&A would be the best thing. As we came along here, I noticed great Chinatown map, really good animated maps. The Harrison Godwin and the Don Bloodgood, those are the illustrated character maps. Those usher in the 20th century, when maps become commercial advent, and they're really about promotion in a very direct and comical way. And that's really an American 20th century advent and the marketing. And we don't see that elsewhere, and that's, I like them because they're so much fun, but what I really like about them is they are capitalism, and we don't see other countries promoting that way. And so as a result, we see a little bit of Britain, we see a little bit of France, but in general, it is an American phenomenon because of our desire to promote and have our businesses succeed. In these processes, Don Bloodgood worked for 4 or 5 different people, but he made some great maps, great maps that really captured the 1950s. Harrison Godwin did one in 1927, the same year the Dole Pineapple air race was. That was the same year Maitland and Hagenberger flew from Oakland to Hawaii. And they thought it would be a good idea to have an air race to emulate the same thing 6 months later. 33 participants, 9 planes finished. They lost 22 aircraft going out to Hawaii in that air race.
Jim,
That's it.
that Godwin map, I don't think we pulled that up, Steve. That's
1927.
44. I love that map because of all the history that's on it. I mean, this,
Yeah.
I learned so much just reading the
Exactly.
little details on
The
that
illustrated map guys were historians who were trying to take stale old history and make it fun and interesting. And so this is how they did it. And Godwin basically went to Cal. He created this map and a map of Hollywood. He used the proceeds to pay for his education at Cal Berkeley. And he and his brother both got an education at Cal, and they graduated as hoteliers in hotel restaurant management. Had the Pine Tree Hotel down in Carmel and the Canterbury on Sutter Street, a successful hotelier. My friend Harry Hunt knew them. Harry's about 80 or so, and he knew them when he was a young man. So he told me that. But Godwin studied history, and he was a historian, but an amateur. He made this map when he was 18 years old. Wow. And it is considered a superlative in the genre. And, you know, like some musicians peak on one album, right? Maybe this guy only had 3 maps in it, but they are fantastic maps, right? And the content, Latin Quarter, all right? So that's North Beach.
Just wait, what year was this map?
1927, all right? So we're at
So
the peak.
basically, he made a mistake. He had to start over.
Yeah, yes, absolutely, everything, and it took him a year to make it. There are things on the map that are indicative of being made at February or March of 27, and then the Dole Pineapple race, that's not till August or October. So all of the year is in there. It's taken him quite a while. One of the things that these contemporary of his would have been Ruth Taylor. Ruth Taylor White was the inventor of Smokey the Bear. Her first book was 1919. Excuse me, she was 19 years old, and she retained the right to vote that year. And she published a book, O Ranger, a tribute to park rangers. But in 1939, she did the map for the Golden Gate Fair out on Treasure Island. And as a woman in San Francisco, she was the highest paid illustrator in California. She had the top floor of the Call building at 3rd and Market, which that very year in 1938 had all the ornamentation taken off of it and turned into the Call Tower, which is a deco structure of concrete, non kind of interest whatsoever. But it used to be this Beaux-Arts kind of ornate thing. But the contemporaries were making money. Godwin made enough money to go to college off of 3 maps, Panama, Hollywood, and this. But the content is really quite local. When we get out to the avenues, you see the rag pickers of the Richmond, which are the predecessors for Golden Gate Sunset Scavenger, Golden Gate Scavenger.
What about the Goa, the ship that
Oh, right,
was out
ship
at
the Goa.
Ocean Beach?
So the ship the Goa, which was the first vessel to make it through a northwestern passage around the world, were Swedes. It made it to San Francisco. We then proceeded to put it at Ocean Beach and have it rot for about 30 years. And in the 70s, we gave, or maybe about 60 years, in the 70s, we gave it back to Sweden, and they've since renovated it. And the man who runs that museum that has the Goa in it came to my store last year. And
So,
he-
right.
oh,
And
and-
it's on the map.
And it's on the map.
Steve, it's on, if you go to Ocean
Yeah.
Beach on that map.
Go to Ocean Beach, it's gonna be down here somewhere. There's Ocean Beach, it's gonna be right in here. And, but he's got all of the regionalism of small-town San Francisco. This is a time when you still swim in the beach, and you still go to Ocean Beach, you still have sutra baths. So outdoor activities are the job of the day. The sunsets, if we just look at the sunset, he's put houses here, and here, and here. He's put houses in 3 places. Well, for me, I thought, oh, that's nice. Well, when I do the research, that's the only places there were houses. Right? That's where the development was. So you had Parkside, which is way out there by Slope Boulevard, and then you had along Lincoln Boulevard 3 sections, which still are predominant commercial areas for us today. So you have the 9th Avenue, Judah area, and then you go out to about 19th Ave, and then you go out to about 27th. And that's the development of it. And interestingly, all 3 of, just as a side note, all 3 of those locations are the inner Sunset. Right? Sunset, inner, outer, middle goes north to south, not east to west. And colloquially, we always refer to it east to west, but in fact, the maps bear out that the inner Sunset runs all along Lincoln, all the way out to M. And then from M through T, that's the middle, and from T through the rest, that's the outer. So it's a north-south trajectory. So that's just something that, as locals, we kind of go, oh, that's kind of contrary to what I thought. Question?
How long after the fire did it take to substantially rebuild?
So real construction started no sooner than 6 months. It took 6 months to clear the debris, particularly in this area here. And that's one of the things and why we have current code and the way they are. Our steel reinforcement, our concrete. It's not about necessarily the building surviving, it's about the building being able to rebuild and be operative as soon as possible. That's what our codes are really trying to attain. Of course, we want to survive, that's an underlying thing, but the fact is, it's about trying to offset that depletion of economic engine for